Hey there, everyone, and welcome to another Daily Cinephile vlog. I'm just talking about real quick. I watched the first episode of the new iCarly reboot, so I don't know if iCarly really qualifies as something that I grew up with per se. I didn't have Nickelodeon or Disney Channel as a kid. I didn't have cable, but there was definitely shows from my childhood that I experienced that were only available on cable during my childhood. But iCarly, I don't know, because it came out in 2007. Around that time, I was just like entering sixth grade. Um, Kind of at that point, I don't know how much you're really watching something like iCarly. It's weird because, I had ABC Kids, so I had seen a lot of shows like Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, which started in like 2005. Hannah Montana, which started in 2006. That's So Raven started in 2003. So like those shows I'm very well aware of, at least the first couple seasons, because if you want to go to my one Saturday morning video I did on my other channel, where I went over the whole history of One Saturday Morning and ABC Kids. Basically, they only had like the first couple seasons on repeat on ABC Kids. I don't know if anyone remembers that, but yeah, it was like a wacky time. I've seen the first couple episodes from the first season of Hannah Montana several times over because you wake up on a Saturday, you're bored, you're eating cereal, you're just gonna watch Hannah Montana. And I did that from whenever it started airing, I think like in 2007, all the way until ABC Kids wrapped things up in 2011. Weird times. That's basically my experience with uh cable television, like kids shows anyway. That's weird too. Like, yeah, that's the 10th anniversary of ABC Kids ending is coming up. So it's weird. I'm very nostalgic for ABC Kids and One Saturday Morning in general, but also just early TV, um, you know, shows that aired on Disney Channel and Nickelodeon in general. iCarly was never one I really grew up with, but it was one that I had seen on occasion. I liked the premise of the show, but it kind of had that typical Nickelodeon humor that they have with all their live action shows that isn't, the best, and it hasn't certainly aged the best. Like, it doesn't really live up, and it's a little too much with the slapstick, and it's a little too simplistic with the slapstick, and then everything else just isn't as good. I'll at least give credit that like Drake and Josh, I think still kind of holds up. And another show that I've watched recently that was definitely after my time, Victorious. Victorious started in like 2010, so at that point, I was not, given the fact that I didn't have cable, I was not paying attention to shows that were airing on cable or satellite television. So Victorious, which I think started in 2010, was not a show that I paid attention to or had any awareness of until like Sam and Cat came out. And the only reason I know anything about Sam and Cat was because I knew the character Sam from iCarly, and then me and my friend our senior year, because that's like when the show started, for its very short runtime, we would like watch it at his house. But it was like after school we would go to his house and we'd have it on the TV as we're doing other things. So I grew attached to that show, weirdly enough. But Victorious I never watched when it originally premiered, but I recently rewatched it while it was on Netflix, and that show is actually very good. I will like, I'd almost be, if I had the time, I'd almost be interested in doing like a full blown video about Victorious, because I actually think that show is much funnier than a lot of the other Nickelodeon shows, and I kind of wish they would do a reboot of that, like, especially since a lot of the characters in that show are actually like, I thought, better comedic talent than what were in iCarly, and so if they did like a reboot of that, I'd be very interested. But iCarly, I was like, okay, so Paramount Plus, I get it. They want to tap into that nostalgia. It's been about 10 years since the show ended. Let's tap into that right now with some of these people who are starting to grow up. And let's make the show a little more grown up. This is the way they want to do Lizzie McGuire, for instance. They were going to do a Lizzie McGuire reboot. Hilary Duff and a lot of the producers really wanted to make it, more adult. Not too overly adult. We're not talking about like, let's throw some sexed up scenes and murder in there. No, they just kind of wanted to make it adult with the audience that had grown up, have more adult subjects in it and not make it so much like a Disney Channel show. But I guess Disney didn't want to do that, and they ended up getting canceled. So iCarly, from what I heard, was they were gonna try to make it a little more adult, which they have. I mean, they drink alcohol in the show, so it's like, okay, they've grown up. um, there's definitely like different language in the show, but it's still not like anything that I'm like, oh, they could never air this on Nickelodeon. I'm like, yeah, they probably still could, with enough explanations for the kids who are watching. I think like they probably could show this on Nickelodeon just fine. Um, I only watched the first episode. I didn't watch because there's 3 up right now. They might even have more than that, but I watched the first episode with my fiance. It was a show that she grew up with. She's very, well aware of it. We actually have the DVDs of the show. You're not gonna be able to see them because they're actually behind the couch, but the DVDs that she owned, she actually has them and they're in my collection now. Um, so I've watched some episodes from those DVDs, but she's very like knows the show very well. But even she has said that she's not the biggest fan of the show now. And I actually found like one of the big things that she was bringing up was like she was happy that Jeanette McCurdy wasn't coming back because she actually wasn't a big fan of the Sam. Ugh, sorry about that. She wasn't a big fan of the Sam character, and now that Sam's gone, she was actually thinking maybe this will, maybe I'll like this a little more because, that character I wasn't always a big fan of, and that's like the one character that's not in this reboot. But I had like a whole premise in my head of how they should do the show. I was like, what's really interesting to me is that when iCarly came out, it was kind of doing a spoof of some sorts of all the different YouTube stars who were in existence at the time. People like Fred, Smosh, Shane Dawson, the big, like number one YouTubers that were online back in like 2007. And I thought it would have been a little interesting because given that all of those folks, who had like it's a way different kind of humor that was around during that time, but also a whole different form of video making. Whereas, less technology, less editing ability, was still more praised back then. Whereas now it's like if you're entering the YouTube sphere, you better be like, if you want to get any notoriety, you got to be like on your A game. And I thought would have been interesting for iCarly is if, given that she kind of had a show similar to something like what Smosh was doing, but also was kind of doing things like the top YouTubers of that age, like Fred and Shane Dawson and others. I thought it would have been a little interesting if the show iCarly had like ended and she tried to like come back because obviously like she would still have notoriety of some sort because like in the original show it was pretty big, and people who were in early YouTube are still like, people still know who they are, but I don't think the younger people know who they are as well. And also, I think just because of how, audiences who watched them back then, their tastes automatically change. The original audience who watched you back then is not going to have immediate nostalgia for you now. So what I thought would have been interesting with iCarly is if they actually did something where like the show ended, but then she tried to bring it back and try to do the exact same thing that she did before, back when the show originally aired, and just hope for the same success. But what if she didn't become successful right away? Because that style of video making and humor just doesn't really exist anymore. Or at least you got to have a different style of doing it, or you got to be a little more advanced with it. And I thought that would have been an interesting take. Like, what if, like in the first episode, she gets so excited, tries to bring iCarly back, lives up to everything that she did originally on the show, and then it was a failure. And then after that, what if the whole first season was her trying to find a new groove in the ever-changing landscape of online media? They even have a younger girl in the show who kind of refers to iCarly, the character of Carly, as one of the olds. And, this girl is talking about, like, all the content that she's making herself. And the fact that Carly hasn't uploaded a video in a month, so that means that she doesn't even exist anymore. Because, like, in internet years, that's like a full year of not posting, which I think is like, that's an interesting concept. And I kind of wish they would run with that idea that Carly is a little outdated, and the whole idea of iCarly is a little outdated. And what if she actually had to spend the whole season trying to find something new that could work, that could connect with audiences? And eventually I thought the thing to me that would be the most interesting would be the fact that, like, Jeanette McCurdy, who's not on the show anymore, why don't you have Fred then? Why don't you have him end up becoming one of the people who's on camera? Like, eventually, my whole idea was like a lot of people who came from that era of YouTube now do like podcasts where they're a little more honest. They're just kind of straight up more honest and talking about their life and more down to earth. And I thought it would be interesting if this whole season could eventually evolve to that. And that in my head would have been the perfect like premise of the show. Carly kind of, dealing with her regular life struggles, which was kind of the original show anyway. Like, yeah, she had like an internet show, but it wasn't really like the main premise of the show. And this new show, same thing. They don't really get to her actually doing the show until the very end, and I suspect that the other episodes will be like that too. I mean, who knows? Maybe like what I'm saying right now is what happens in the later episodes, but I'm just basing this on the end of this episode, where as soon as she starts filming on the original set of iCarly and is doing one of the original gags, it's getting tons of views right away with no problem. So I feel like they, missed an opportunity for making a very unique concept of a show. Like, because internet's been a long, internet has been around long enough now where people who were part of it at the beginning can now be seen as like outdated or old school or past their prime, like the classic Hollywood tale or, tale of someone being famous where it's like you're past your prime. The famous athlete, for instance, you are past your prime. You could do that with an internet star now, and that could be a very interesting story. You could have a completely different take about it and how they're trying to find their footing in a new landscape and how it's ever changing and it's kind of hard to keep up. And how do you make something unique and something that's, to me, the biggest answer is to make something a little more personal. Because I think a lot of early YouTubers have started to be a little more personal with their work, and it turns out good. And I think that would have been an interesting concept for the show, and I think also it would have been a good chance for her, because like in my head, I was like, wouldn't it be cool if like the final season she finally comes up with an idea where she's like, let's just do a show where we just talk about ourselves, and Fred, why don't you just come on camera? We don't need the fancy angles, we don't need the fancy editing. Let's just talk about ourselves because we have life that we can talk about. And I don't know. The thing is, maybe they could still grow towards that, but I mean, I feel like from the first episode, nah, they're just gonna do a retread of what the original show was like, but they're gonna throw some like adult context in there, and they do that with the first episode, but not as it's still it's still not too much. It's like it's still kind of like young. I'm trying to say young adults, but like I mean like teenagers could still like watch this show, I guess. I mean, I don't know what that demographic really is. Like, who are the people really watching, like, iCarly and Drake and Josh? Because that demographic at that time, I guess, would have been between the ages of, like, not really elementary school, but old enough in elementary school, but not quite, like, high school. I guess there's middle school, but, like, even then, it feels like it's too old. Um, I don't know. It's just, to me, it's a very, like, quick demographic. I mean, that kind of, in my head, answers why like a lot of these shows that are about like teenagers and are kind of directed at like middle schoolers, why their seasons always only last about like 2 seasons, because that's how quick that demographic ages up and gets sick of the show. um but with iCarly, I feel like, yeah, there's a nostalgia for it, but they seem to be just doing a retread of everything that was done in the original, which, you could throw some adult context in there for some of the other scenes that happen in the show, but I just don't see, like, I don't know. I guess I don't know what people want, because it's like, a Fuller House, for instance, people just wanted to see Full House again, and that's what they got, including the same kind of humor that was in the original show that to me isn't that great, but that's what people wanted, I guess, and people were happy with it, so maybe that's what they want out of iCarly. But in my head, there would have been like a much more this was like a chance where they could have done something really interesting with the idea of an aging internet star, someone who's not even that old, but it's just in the internet age where things from yesterday become old so quickly. Like, how do you find your footing in it? I think it would have been a great premise for the show. In my head, I thought there was like, not that they had to do exactly what I was thinking in my head, but they could have done so many like things with it. They have more episodes coming out, so maybe they'll do something different. But honestly, like as of right now, I'm like I'll keep with it just for the sake of like watching it, and you know, I'm sure my fiance will continue to watch it. And I'm not, I don't hate the show, but I do find at first I was like, this is kind of boring. Um, it's cool to kind of see them again, but it's kind of boring. Um, but I was just thinking, I was like, I felt like, you know, in a way, for something like this, I know it's an iCarly reboot. I know, what should I be expecting? But I'm like, it's too bad because there actually was something you could have done with this, and I'm not sure they're gonna do it. But we'll see. Maybe it gets maybe they have a season 2. I don't know. Thanks for watching.